Jerome King stepped into the softly lit first-class cabin of Horizon Airways Flight 119 from Los Angeles to New York with a quiet confidence that spoke volumes even before he said a word. Dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that seemed custom-made to emphasize his broad shoulders and impeccable taste, he moved with a calm assurance that belied the storm waiting on the horizon. His polished dress shoes clicked gently against the carpeted floor as he made his way toward seat 1B, and the faint trace of his cedarwood cologne lingered like a subtle promise of success. Yet, even as he embraced the luxury of the cabin, a chill ran through him at the sound of a sharp, scornful voice. Vanessa Creed, the lead flight attendant, eyed him with thinly veiled contempt and sneered, "Guess they're letting anyone up here now." A remark dripping with prejudice was barely hidden behind a smile that never reached her cold blue eyes. Passengers nearby exchanged smirks and knowing glances, silently reinforcing the notion that Jerome did not belong in this world of privilege. Within minutes, the tension escalated into a full-blown confrontation. The boarding process, already marred by Vanessa's deliberate condescension, took a turn when she scrutinized Jerome's boarding pass as if it were a counterfeit ticket to a dream he had earned through years of hard work. "This looks off," she said sharply, her tone laced with accusation as she held the pass up to the light. The junior attendant, trying to follow her lead, fumbled with the scanner until it confirmed Jerome's status with a cheerful beep. "It's all good," Jerome replied quietly, his voice steady as a seasoned negotiator. Yet Vanessa's eyes narrowed as she demanded, "No, do it again!" a command that sent a ripple of discomfort through the cabin. In that moment, every passenger's gaze fixed on him, and the room filled with an unspoken judgment that cut deeper than any physical blow. Jerome's heart pounded not only with the frustration of being singled out, but also with the familiar sting of racial discrimination. The subtle yet pervasive whispers around him confirmed what he already knew all too well. In a world where appearances often dictated one's worth, he was constantly expected to prove himself despite his accomplishments. As he handed over his boarding pass once more and it scanned without issue, Vanessa's sneer remained like an indelible scar on his dignity. He could almost feel the weight of history pressing down on him, as if centuries of prejudice had conspired to make this moment an inevitability. The cabin, resplendent with polished wood trim and buttery leather seats, suddenly transformed from a haven of luxury to a stage for humiliation. When Jerome reached his assigned seat 1B, he carefully stored his heavy leather briefcase, a vital vessel for a merger deal that was poised to redefine the airline industry, in the overhead bin. Just as he was about to settle into his seat, Vanessa reappeared with the force of a vendetta. "Hold up," she commanded in a clipped official tone, her manicured nails flashing as she reached for the bin. "I need you to keep that with you." Her voice carried a condescending finality that left no room for discussion. Jerome paused, his hand still on the bin's edge, and looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and weary resignation. The spacious overhead compartment, empty and inviting, seemed to mock her baseless insistence. "Plane hasn't even finished boarding," Jerome replied evenly, his words measured and calm, as if he were addressing a wayward child rather than an enforcer of unjust rules. Vanessa's smile was as thin as a razor's edge, and with a sharp gesture she slammed the bin shut. The resounding bang echoed through the cabin, drawing startled looks and stifled chuckles from fellow passengers. In that moment, the gulf between those who were treated with dignity and those who were not widened ever further, and Jerome felt the familiar burden of being the outsider. A burden compounded by the cruelty of someone who had taken a personal vendetta against him. All around him, well-dressed travelers exchanged knowing glances and sympathetic nods, their eyes reflecting a quiet anger at the injustice they were witnessing. Even a white gentleman in a crisp pinstripe suit, seated a few rows back, couldn't help but lean over to his companion, whispering in a tone laced with superiority. Meanwhile, Vanessa moved on as if her work here was done, leaving behind a trail of discomfort and a cabin charged with the anticipation of further conflict. As Jerome settled into his seat, he could not shake the feeling that this was only the opening salvo in a battle that had been building for far too long. He adjusted the cufflinks on his shirt, a subtle display of refined control, and tried to focus on the merger awaiting him in New York, a deal that promised to revolutionize the industry. Yet the memory of Vanessa's icy stare and the humiliating spectacle of the overhead bin stunt lingered in his mind, casting a long shadow over his otherwise meticulously planned day. Moments later, a white passenger in his 50s, clad in a linen shirt and comfortable boat shoes, boarded the plane with the ease of someone who had never known the sting of discrimination. Vanessa's demeanor shifted instantly, her voice softening as she stepped forward to assist him. "Not a problem at all, Mr. Grayson," she cooed in a tone dripping with feigned warmth. Her actions, so gentle and accommodating, stood in stark contrast to the harsh treatment Jerome had endured. Watching her interact with the new passenger, Jerome felt an old familiar ache of isolation and helplessness. The sight was a painful reminder of the double standards that defined his everyday existence, a betrayal that struck at the very core of his self-worth. Even as he exchanged a brief, polite nod with the passenger, Jerome's inner world churned with conflicting emotions: resentment, sorrow, and a burning desire for retribution that he knew would one day rise like a phoenix from the ashes of his current suffering. He was not merely a businessman with a merger to finalize. He was a man who had been forced, time and again, to endure cruelty masked as routine procedure, and though he maintained an exterior of calm, the promise of eventual, spectacular payback simmered beneath his measured words. The flight continued, the cabin lights dimming to a warm golden hue as the plane taxied slowly toward the runway. Jerome, his briefcase now resting heavily on his lap, took a deep breath and attempted to quell the storm raging inside him. His phone buzzed, a text from his assistant reminding him that the merger docs were ready. For a fleeting moment, the practical demands of business clashed with the raw emotions of personal humiliation, and he realized that every slight, every act of cruelty had only fueled a determination to rise above the pettiness of prejudice. Vanessa, however, was not one to let a minor victory go unpunished. With the poise of a practiced antagonist, she returned once more to Jerome's space, this time with a fresh pretext to undermine his confidence. "Mr. King," she said, her voice dripping with false concern, "we seem to have a little glitch in the system. It appears your seat has been double booked." Her tone was sugary sweet, yet edged with an unmistakable sneer. Jerome's brow furrowed in disbelief as he produced his boarding pass once again, the ink still crisp and clear. "I booked this seat 3 weeks ago," he explained, his voice calm even as the familiar sting of injustice tightened around his heart. Vanessa tilted her head as though she were indulging a child who failed to grasp the rules of a rigged game. "Well, the system says otherwise," she retorted, her smile barely disguising the malice behind her eyes. "I'm afraid you'll need to move to seat 9C. It's just a formality under FAA regulations. We simply cannot have 2 passengers in 1 seat." Every word was laced with condescension, a calculated move designed to further isolate Jerome and diminish his sense of entitlement to the space he had rightfully earned. His fingers tightened around the boarding pass, a silent declaration that he would not be cowed, even as every fiber of his being ached from the cumulative weight of humiliation. In that moment, as the plane prepared for takeoff and the golden light of the setting sun bathed the cabin in a warm glow, Jerome King's resolve solidified. The injustice he had suffered today was but a prelude to a reckoning that would be as grand and sweeping as it was long overdue. The quiet, dignified man in the tailored suit was not merely enduring a moment of personal disgrace. He was silently plotting a future in which every slight, every act of racial discrimination would be met with an epic response. A response that would resonate far beyond the confines of a single flight, one that would leave the architects of his misery reeling in shock and awe. For now, the seeds of retribution had been sown, and though the pain of the present moment was palpable, it was tempered by the promise of a future where justice would prevail in the most spectacular fashion. In the gentle cadence of his measured speech and the calm determination of his gaze, one could see the faint outline of a plan that would transform every insult and every act of cruelty into a triumphant anthem of payback. And as the engines roared to life and the plane lifted off into the twilight sky, Jerome King settled back into his seat with the quiet assurance that someday soon, his story of quiet suffering would give way to an unforgettable moment of victorious, thunderous retribution that would make every onlooker exclaim, "Now that is what I call justice." Jerome King maintained his quiet dignity even as Vanessa Creed's latest stunt unfolded with an air of theatrical malice. It all began when Vanessa, tapping at her tablet with a practiced nonchalance, sighed in a way that was equal parts performance and disdain. "Nope, still showing 9C, she announced, her tone dripping with feigned regret as if the error was solely his fault. "Let's not make this a thing, okay? Grab your bag and follow me." In the hushed, expectant silence of the Halfgull cabin, where passengers sipped pre-flight drinks and exchanged curious glances, Jerome, a tall, dignified man whose presence exuded quiet authority despite the storm of prejudice swirling around him, held out his boarding pass with steady hands. His calm, measured voice, edged with steel beneath the surface, challenged her unfounded orders. "Scan it, right here, right now." Vanessa's smile faltered for just an instant before she snatched the pass and ran it through her scanner. A crisp beep confirmed what the machine had to say: Jerome King, seat 1B. Yet rather than accept the undeniable truth, Vanessa's jaw clenched visibly, a subtle twitch under her cheek that betrayed the intensity of her simmering resentment. "Must have been a glitch," she muttered irritably as she shoved the pass back at him, insisting, "But I still need you to move. Safety protocol." Despite the humiliation and the bitter undercurrent of racial bias that stained every exchange, Jerome's eyes remained calm and unyielding as he replied, "Show me the rule book." His voice was steady, calm as a placid lake before a brewing storm, and though he had every right to demand fairness, he was painfully aware that challenging Vanessa's authority in public could escalate the situation even further. With a reluctant pivot, Vanessa spat out, "Fine, stay, but don't say I didn't warn you," and Jerome settled back into his seat, his heavy leather briefcase laden with the contracts for a merger that could revolutionize the airline industry, resting on his lap. For a moment he allowed himself a small glimmer of victory, thinking that perhaps he had managed to thwart her attempts to diminish his worth. But the calm was short-lived. As the plane's engines roared to life and the cabin buzzed with the low hum of anticipation, Vanessa reappeared like a relentless specter of injustice. With her stiletto heels clicking down the aisle, she announced in a voice that brooked no dissent, loud enough for every passenger to hear, "All right, folks, we're sorted now. Mr. King, 9C is ready for you. Let's go." Jerome's heart sank as incredulity washed over him. He had thought the matter settled. "We settled this," he murmured, his tone tinged with disbelief and quiet defiance. But Vanessa leaned in close, her voice lowering to a venomous hiss that sent a chill down his spine. "No, we didn't. FAA says I call the shots on seating. Move, or I'll have security do it." The threat hung in the air like a physical blow, and even as the murmurs of disapproval and the barely concealed amusement of other passengers swirled around him, Jerome felt the weight of yet another injustice, a cruel reminder that his mere presence was enough to provoke a battle rooted in centuries of discrimination. Despite the burning anger and the deep humiliation that stung his pride, Jerome knew that any overt confrontation might only worsen his plight, especially with an important merger on the line. Reluctantly, he rose from his seat, his 6'2" frame moving with measured dignity as he clutched his briefcase tight. With each step down the aisle, every polite yet pitying glance from fellow travelers felt like an accusation, a testament to a society where a man of his accomplishments was forced to prove his worth time and again. Vanessa led him past the plush first-class rows, where the clink of champagne glasses and the expansive legroom were symbols of privilege, and into the cramped confines of seat 9C. The new seat was a far cry from the dignified space he had earned. It was wedged tightly between a snoring gentleman in a worn tracksuit and a lady whose yapping lapdog provided an incessant background noise. The very act of being forced into such an unseemly setting was a public declaration of his otherness, a stark, painful contrast to the luxury he had rightfully claimed. As Jerome squeezed himself into the narrow space, the armrests dug uncomfortably into his hips, and the gentle murmur of derision from a white gentleman in a pinstripe suit did little to soothe the raw sting of discrimination. The cold humiliation was compounded by the fact that his vital merger documents, papers that could change the landscape of the airline industry, now rested precariously in a soggy briefcase, a casualty of Vanessa's relentless quest to undermine him. The tension in the cabin escalated further when, about an hour into the flight, Vanessa herself wheeled the drink cart back up the aisle. Every movement she made was sharp and deliberate, as though she were a predator stalking her prey. With an almost perverse pleasure, she handed out crystal glasses of wine to the first-class passengers, her smile sugary but hollow. Jerome's throat felt as parched as the desert, his thoughts a whirlwind of suppressed fury and burning humiliation. Then came the moment that would etch itself into his memory. A moment when Vanessa, in her twisted choreography of cruelty, approached his row with a tray of steaming coffee. "Coffee?" she cooed, in a tone that dripped with insincere sweetness. Jerome reached out in a gesture of cautious acceptance, only to have fate, or rather Vanessa's calculated malice, intervene. In the tight confines of the aisle, her elbow jerked just as she passed, sending the scalding liquid cascading over his lap. The hot coffee soaked through his impeccably tailored suit, burning his thighs with a ferocity that mirrored the searing betrayal of his dignity. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin as passengers reacted with shock and a tinge of dark amusement, their eyes flickering between the fallen cup and Jerome's pained expression. "Oops," Vanessa said lightly, stepping back as if the incident were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "Tight space back here, my bad." Her voice, far too casual for the destruction she had wrought, made it abundantly clear that this was no accident. It was a calculated, malicious act. As Jerome scrambled to grab a stack of napkins that Vanessa carelessly tossed his way, his heart pounded in time with the throbbing burn across his skin. The napkins, far from offering solace, merely served as a grim reminder of the cascading series of indignities he was forced to endure. His suit, now stained and ruined, his briefcase dampened and his spirit bruised, became the emblem of a man pushed to the brink by relentless injustice. Yet even as pain and humiliation threatened to overwhelm him, a quiet determination began to kindle in his chest. A resolve to one day unleash a retribution so magnificent that it would leave the architects of his suffering stunned, and the onlookers exclaiming in astonishment. For the remainder of the flight, the atmosphere in the cabin grew ever more charged with tension and whispered judgments. As the coffee stain on Jerome King's suit dried into a dark, crusty patch, and his thighs throbbed from the burn, every moment felt like an eternity. His soggy briefcase lay between his knees, a tangible symbol of both his hard-fought success and the repeated attempts to tear it down. Even as he leaned back, trying to steady his breathing and mentally recite the merger numbers that might salvage some semblance of control, he knew deep down that Vanessa's malice was far from spent. The flickering cabin lights and the rattle of the drink cart were constant reminders of a battle that was far from over. A battle that, if pushed to the extreme, would erupt into an act of revenge so resounding that it would redefine justice itself. Then came another twist in the unfolding drama. Vanessa's attention shifted to the flimsy tray table in front of Jerome, a plastic slab sticky with spilled coffee and wobbling precariously on its hinges. "Mr. King," she announced, her tone now laced with a dangerous mix of authority and condescension. "We've got a problem." Your tray table is malfunctioning. Jerome glanced down at the tray table, his patience fraying as the malfunction became yet another excuse for Vanessa to assert her dominance. "Looks fine to me," he replied evenly, though his voice barely masked the mounting irritation beneath. Vanessa's eyes sparkled with a glint of triumph as she countered, "It's not fine. It's been reported as tampered with. That's a safety violation, and I'm marking you as a risk." The word risk crashed over him like a tidal wave of injustice, and whispers erupted among the passengers. A snide comment from the pinstripe-suited gentleman confirmed their prejudiced assumptions, and Jerome's blood ran cold with the realization that every rule and regulation was being manipulated to serve Vanessa's twisted agenda. Before he could muster a response, Vanessa's tone turned imperious. "Stay put," she ordered, her blonde ponytail whipping around as she marched off to the galley. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted palpably, the air thick with suspicion and silent outrage. Jerome clenched his fists so hard that his nails bit into his palms, his inner voice screaming in protest even as he sat frozen in his cramped seat. The final blow came when the intercom crackled to life and Vanessa's voice boomed over it, crisp and authoritarian. "Attention crew, we've got a potential safety issue in row 9. Security to 9C, please." In that moment, as a burly security officer strode toward him and passengers leaned forward with morbid curiosity, Jerome King felt the last vestiges of his composure begin to crack. With painstaking deliberation, he handed over his briefcase for inspection, his heart pounding in his ears. The officers rummaging through soggy contracts, a tablet, and other mundane items was done with an air of indifference that underscored the farce of the entire ordeal. When the officer finally declared, "Nothing to find," Jerome's voice, calm as granite yet burning with suppressed fury, cut through the murmurs. "Told you, it's her mess, not mine." That declaration, delivered with quiet finality, marked a turning point. A moment when the simmering injustice was acknowledged by those around him, if only in silent, sympathetic glances. Vanessa's face tightened in a futile attempt to maintain control, while Jerome sat back down, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction in the minds of the onlookers, many of whom had witnessed the relentless degradation of a man whose only fault was his skin color. A spark of righteous indignation began to glow. And deep within Jerome King, amid the pain, humiliation, and the cold cruelty of a system rigged against him, a plan for retribution was forming. A plan that promised to turn every slight, every act of overt discrimination into a resounding, triumphant declaration of justice. A future moment of payback so magnificent that when it finally unfolded, those who had once sneered and whispered in judgment would be left utterly speechless, exclaiming in awe and, dare I say, delight. As the flight continued its journey through the starlit sky toward New York, Jerome King's mind raced with visions of a future where every injustice would be met with a response as grand and unwavering as the spirit of American resilience. Though his suit was ruined and his body ached from the physical and emotional toll, his resolve burned brighter than ever. He vowed that one day the scales of justice would tip in his favor, and Vanessa Creed's reign of cruelty would come crashing down in a spectacular act of retribution that would echo through the corridors of power. And in that promise, dear listener, there was a spark of hope. A hope that even in the darkest moments of discrimination and despair, the human spirit could rise and deliver a payoff so extraordinary that it would make even the most jaded hearts exclaim, "Now that is what I call justice." Jerome King had tried to convince himself that Vanessa's earlier strikes were isolated mishaps that he could simply endure, focusing on the million-dollar merger waiting in New York. Yet as he clutched his damp briefcase, a constant unwelcome reminder of her last cruel move, a new insidious current began to ripple through the cabin. At first, the whispers were soft, almost sympathetic, but they quickly sharpened into cutting accusations. A well-dressed gentleman in a pinstripe suit leaned toward a refined woman wearing a silk scarf, his tone low yet unmistakably judgmental as he murmured, "He seems unstable. Perhaps he shouldn't even be on this flight." The woman, her eyes darting with barely concealed disapproval, nodded in agreement as they both cast furtive glances toward Jerome, their hushed voices fueling a tide of mistrust that spread like wildfire among the passengers. Jerome turned slowly to survey the damage to his reputation and found Vanessa near the galley, her head bent close to a first-class passenger, a white gentleman in a crisp linen blazer, whispering urgently and gesturing subtly toward row 9. The gentleman's brow furrowed as he listened, and when his gaze finally drifted over to Jerome, it held a mixture of pity and deep-seated suspicion. Vanessa's words, laced with venom and deceit, were quickly relayed to anyone who would listen. "It's been a problem ever since he boarded at LAX, she murmured to another passenger adorned with dazzling diamond earrings, her tone conspiratorial and dismissive. "He's unstable, you know how these people can be." The woman clutched her wine glass tighter, her eyes fixed on Jerome as if he might erupt into chaos at any moment. Soon, the whispers multiplied. Someone said he had fought over a seat change, another claimed he had tampered with the tray table. Each rumor piled onto the other, painting Jerome as a dangerous liability rather than the composed, self-made businessman he truly was. Inside, Jerome's jaw tensed so visibly that a muscle twitched under his skin. Yet he remained as still as a stone, his hands gripping the worn leather of his briefcase. He had already cleared the security search and silenced Vanessa's baseless accusations with cold, measured logic, but now she had twisted the narrative further, turning him into a villain in the eyes of the other passengers, without him having lifted a finger. The cabin lights buzzed softly overhead, and the constant hum of the engine provided a backdrop to an atmosphere charged with hostility and suspicion. A young boy in the row ahead peeked over his seat, wide-eyed with curiosity until his mother hissed for him to look away. Even the lady with the yapping dog edged away, as if Jerome carried a contagion. Every whispered word, every sidelong glance felt like another blow to his dignity. Vanessa returned to the galley, her heels clicking with the arrogance of a conqueror as she stole glances at Jerome. In those fleeting moments, he caught a glimmer of satisfaction in her cold blue eyes, a sadistic triumph that made him realize she had won this round of psychological warfare. His suit, once a symbol of his hard-won success, now reeked of stale coffee and shame, and the careful reputation he had built over years was crumbling under the weight of her venomous lies. Jerome leaned back, his arm resting heavily on the creaking tray table, and stared blankly at the seat in front of him. He had thought the coffee spill was the worst of it, a petty physical jab that he could shrug off. But now, the cumulative effect of the rumors felt like a slow, deliberate betrayal, a knife twisting in his back with every whispered lie. It was clear to Jerome that Vanessa had shifted her tactics from overt physical humiliation to a more insidious psychological assault. She had turned the entire plane against him, making him a pariah in a space he had earned through honest work and perseverance. His fingers curled around the armrests as the pressure of every accusing gaze and every muttered word threatened to crush his resolve. The flight seemed to stretch into an endless gauntlet, each minute a reminder of the cruelty inflicted upon him, and his mind churned with worry about what other devious plans Vanessa might have up her perfectly pressed sleeve. 2 hours into Horizon Airways Flight 119, cruising at 35,000 feet above the Nevada desert, the atmosphere was heavy with tension and the sour taste of betrayal. Jerome sat rigidly in his cramped seat 9 seat, his coffee-stained suit clinging uncomfortably to his thighs, and the lingering burn a constant reminder of Vanessa's cruelty. The tray table in front of him wobbled with every subtle movement, its sticky surface an ever-present testament to her malice. Despite the hostile murmurs that swirled like a swarm of flies around him, Jerome knew he had to refocus on the monumental merger deal that lay ahead. With great care, he unzipped his battered briefcase and opened his laptop, praying that the hot coffee had not irreparably damaged his critical documents. The screen flickered dimly to life, offering a small beacon of hope amid the chaos. As the numbers of the $500 million deal began to populate the display, Jerome exhaled with a brief sense of relief. For a moment, he thought that maybe Vanessa's vendetta was coming to an end, that he could finally channel his energies back into his work. But Vanessa was far from finished. In a calculated move to disrupt his progress, she rolled a drink cart down the aisle with deliberate precision. The cart, a polished instrument of her mischief, came to a halt near his row. With a voice that dripped with venomous sweetness, she asked, "Need anything?" As if extending a trivial offer of service. Jerome, his eyes fixed on a revenue projection on his screen, muttered a simple, "Water," barely glancing up. Vanessa's expression, however, was one of barely contained malice. As she reached for a bottle of water, her foot caught the edge of the cart in a clumsy yet all too convenient stumble. A can of soda, its silver surface catching the cabin's light, tumbled from the cart and crashed onto Jerome's keyboard. In an instant, liquid gushed over the keys, fizzing and sparking as the screen blinked erratically before going completely black. Jerome's heart sank as he jerked back in horror, his hands scrambling to salvage what remained of his once trusted device. The merger documents, months in the making and worth millions, were suddenly reduced to a dead, unresponsive screen. Vanessa stepped back with a feigned look of shock, her words tumbling out in a tone that dripped with mock regret. "Oh no, I'm so sorry. These carts are tricky in such tight spaces." The dog lady gasped. The tracksuit-clad man jerked awake from his nap, and every eye in the cabin fixed on Jerome as if witnessing a public spectacle of failure. Jerome stared at the ruined laptop, his mind reeling from the betrayal. He wiped the sticky keys with the sleeve of his suit, a suit now forever marred by a cascade of soda, and then, with a voice low and edged with fury, he demanded, "Get me a replacement now." Vanessa's eyebrows rose in a theatrical display of disbelief, and she retorted coolly, "A replacement? Those devices are reserved for verified first-class passengers only. You're in 9C now, not on the premium list. That is the policy." Jerome's calm facade faltered for just a moment as his heart pounded in his ears. "I was in 1B. You moved me against my will. This is entirely on you," he insisted, his tone a mix of controlled anger and wounded pride. Vanessa merely shrugged, her response as frosty as ever. "Rules don't change. You'll have to wait until we land in New York. I'm sure your little project can handle a delay." With that dismissive remark, she spun on her heels and strode away, leaving Jerome to deal with a soaked lap, a dead laptop, and a reputation in tatters. The cabin buzzed once again with renewed whispers and snickers as passengers exchanged looks of disbelief and judgment. Jerome's phone vibrated in his pocket, but as he pulled it out to check for any salvageable backup of his work, a new announcement crackled through the intercom in a tone that brooked no argument. "Attention passengers. We are experiencing signal interference affecting our navigation systems. For safety, all personal hotspots are being disabled immediately. Please comply." Jerome's heart sank further as the hotspot icon on his phone blinked red and then went dark, severing his last connection to the cloud backup that might have saved his merger documents. Moments later, the captain's voice boomed over the intercom, clipped and forceful. "Folks, we have traced the interference to row 9. Whoever is running a device there, cut it off immediately, or we will have to divert the flight." In an instant, the murmurs in the cabin escalated to outright shouts, and hostile eyes turned toward Jerome, as if he were deliberately sabotaging the plane's systems. A voice from a passenger in seat 3A shouted, "Get him off! What is he doing back there?" Another woman in first class clutched her pearls and demanded, "This is unacceptable!" The air grew thick with anger as passengers began to shout accusations, and Jerome could see Vanessa standing by the galley with a self-satisfied smile, her arms folded in a manner that screamed victory. She had orchestrated this entire debacle. Despite his efforts to explain that he had done nothing to interfere with the plane's systems, the hostile crowd was unswayed. "He's been trouble since takeoff. the pinstripe-suited man bellowed, his voice echoing off the cabin walls. The dog lady shrank even further into her seat while even the tracksuit guy glared at him as if he were a menace. Desperation mingled with determination as Jerome raised his hands and tried to speak calmly. "It's just a phone. There is no interference. Please, check the logs." But his words fell on deaf ears as the captain issued one final chilling warning. "Row 9, last warning." The hotspot flickered one last time before dying completely, and Jerome felt his last lifeline to his work slip away. The shouting eventually died down, but the damage was irreversible. Passengers glared at him with a mixture of fear, anger, and prejudice, muttering slurs and accusing him of endangering everyone's safety. Vanessa strode back into view, her heels clicking triumphantly as she paused near his row. In a low, menacing tone meant only for him, she sneered, "See what happens when you don't follow the rules? Next time it won't be just your..." Her words trailed off ominously, leaving Jerome with the bitter taste of injustice and the burning desire for retribution. As the flight inched toward its destination, Jerome King sat in the wreckage of his ruined work and shattered dignity. Every moment a testament to the cruelty he had endured at the hands of Vanessa Creed. Yet amid the bitter humiliation and mounting anger, a spark of resolve began to kindle within him. A promise that this injustice would not go unanswered. Though his suit was stained, his laptop destroyed, and his reputation smeared by lies, Jerome vowed that one day he would reclaim his honor in a way so grand and resounding that even the most jaded onlookers would stand in awe. In that solemn moment, as the plane sailed through the starlit sky over the Nevada desert, Jerome King silently swore that Vanessa's reign of cruelty would one day be met with a vengeance so spectacular that it would redefine justice and restore his name. Jerome King's phone lay useless in his lap, its once vital connection to a $500 million merger now severed, and the deadline ticking ever closer with no way to reach it. The cabin had settled into a heavy, oppressive silence, yet the hostility lingered like a bitter aftertaste. His once pristine suit now reeked of spilled soda and coffee, clinging uncomfortably to his skin as if it were a constant reminder of Vanessa's calculated sabotage. The burn on his thighs was nothing compared to the raging inferno in his gut. A fire fueled by humiliation, injustice, and the relentless cruelty of a woman determined to see him broken. 3 hours into Horizon Airways Flight 119, cruising at 35,000 feet above the majestic Rockies, Jerome sat imprisoned in Seat 9C. The cramped space wedged between a snoring man in a faded tracksuit and a woman whose yapping dog provided a constant, jarring soundtrack felt more like a punishment than a simple downgrade. His dead laptop, once a gateway to closing a life-changing deal, now rested uselessly on the tray table like a brick. His phone, meant to be his lifeline to the cloud where his merger documents were safely stored, lay dormant, a casualty of Vanessa's vicious interference. Around him, the atmosphere was thick with disdain. Passengers who had once enjoyed the luxury of first class now exchanged hostile glances and whispered sharp, judgmental words. The dog lady withdrew even further into her seat, clutching her pet as if he could protect her from the contagion of disgrace, while the man in the tracksuit shifted away, as though he might catch a hint of trouble simply by being near Jerome. Vanessa Creed had escalated her war from petty jabs to outright sabotage. She had stolen away his tools, his time, and most importantly, his shot at sealing the merger that could redefine his entire career. Every device that Jerome had counted on to secure his future had been sabotaged by her, leaving him with nothing but a soaked briefcase, a ruined suit, and a seething sense of betrayal. Yet even as he battled the physical discomfort, the sticky fabric, the persistent burn in his legs, and the cramped confines of Seat 9C, his mind churned with the determination to salvage what he could of his legacy. His silence, once his shield, now burned as a reminder that Vanessa had succeeded in turning the entire plane against him. As if to fan the flames of this mounting injustice, Vanessa slipped into first class with a grace that belied the venom in her heart. Her heels made barely a sound on the plush carpet as she moved among a trio of white men in tailored blazers who were sipping bourbon and exuding an air of entitlement. In hushed, conspiratorial tones, she whispered that Jerome had been aggressive since takeoff, that he was unstable and a real troublemaker. This did not disturb and trouble her much, since the visitors she had seen in the yacht were her words, laced with feigned concern, were delivered with a precision meant to ignite prejudice. One of the men, a 6-foot-tall figure in a navy blazer, nodded slowly and shot a pointed glance in Jerome's direction, his eyes narrowing as if he had just identified a threat that needed to be eliminated. Vanessa continued her insidious campaign, weaving through the cabin and planting seeds of suspicion wherever she went. She leaned in close to a woman draped in a luxurious cashmere sweater and murmured that Jerome was not only aggressive but downright dangerous. The woman's grip on her wine glass tightened, and her eyes darted toward Jerome, as if she were watching for the next sign of his alleged instability. With each whispered accusation and every subtle gesture, the hostile murmur among the passengers grew louder, until soon the entire cabin was awash with a tide of distrust and loathing. Then the situation took a violent turn. One of the bourbon-sipping men, clearly emboldened by entitlement and prejudice, stood up and strode purposefully toward Jerome's row. "Hey man, you need to chill out," he bellowed, his voice carrying across the aisle. "We're all stuck here, and you're making it worse." Jerome, though confined by the cramped space of 9C, looked up steadily and replied in a calm tone, "I haven't said a word. I'm just sitting here." But the man scoffed, crossing his arms and sneering, "Yeah, right. We heard about the tray table incident and that whole signal interference mess. Stop playing the victim." The comment carried a racial edge, and in that moment every ear in the cabin perked up, every eye fixed on Jerome with a mix of pity, suspicion, and outright hostility. Summoning every ounce of inner strength, Jerome straightened his posture and said in a voice that was firm yet measured, "I paid for my seat just like each and every one of you. I have every right to be here." His words, delivered with quiet dignity, seemed to momentarily still the murmurs. For a fleeting second, it appeared that the tide might be turning, but Vanessa, ever the architect of his downfall, was not finished. She re-emerged from the galley, clipboard clutched tightly in her hand, and her voice rang out loud and clear. "Excuse me, folks, I need to address something," she announced in a tone that brooked no argument. With a deliberate flourish, she pointed a finger directly at Jerome and declared, "This passenger threatened me right after the signal issue. He's making it impossible to keep everyone safe." The accusation fell like a bombshell, and chaos erupted. The Navy blazer man's face flushed with anger as he leapt to his feet and shouted that Jerome was out of control. His friends quickly joined in, clenching their fists as the woman in cashmere screamed, "Get him out of here!" Soon, the entire cabin was thrown into disarray, passengers shouting, some banging on their armrests, others pulling out their phones to record the spectacle. Jerome, taken aback by the sudden mob mentality, raised his hands in a plea for peace. "That is a lie," he cried out, his voice trembling with a mix of sorrow and indignation. "I never threatened anyone." But his words were drowned by the roar of the angry crowd. The Navy blazer man charged at him, shoving Jerome hard against the galley wall. "You don't threaten me," he roared, spitting out vicious racial slurs that echoed through the cabin. Another passenger grabbed Jerome's arm, and yet another swung a wild fist that grazed his jaw. In moments, the once orderly plane had transformed into a battlefield of prejudice and unchecked anger. Amid the chaos, security officers rushed into the aisle, their imposing figures cutting through the melee. "Break it up," one of them bellowed as he yanked the Navy blazer man back from Jerome. Despite Jerome's best efforts to defend himself with words, the officers soon turned their attention to him. Vanessa seized the moment to whisper, "I told you to follow the rules," her tone dripping with malice as she stood smugly by his side. Before Jerome could protest further, the officers grabbed his arms and twisted them behind his back. The cold bite of handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists, and he felt the searing sting of betrayal as they forced him toward the rear of the cabin. The galley wall pressed uncomfortably against his shoulder as the mob jeered and spat insults, the cacophony of hatred echoing in his ears. Then, just when the situation seemed irredeemably grim, Vanessa went even further. Midway through the commotion, she suddenly stopped in the aisle, clutching her throat with a dramatic gasp. Her clipboard clattered to the floor as she staggered, and in a voice that was both desperate and calculated, she cried out, "Oh God, I can't breathe." Every head in the cabin turned, eyes wide with shock and concern. Vanessa doubled over, her face contorting in a display of apparent distress, and pointed a trembling finger at Jerome. "He did this," she accused in a rasping tone. "That drink, he slipped something in it." The lie exploded over the crowd like a detonator, igniting fresh waves of panic. The navy blazer man leaped up once more, roaring about poison and lunacy, while the woman in cashmere shrieked that everyone was in danger. Passengers surged forward in panic. Some banged on their armrests, others clutched their loved ones tightly as fear gripped the cabin. Jerome tried desperately to speak over the chaos. "I never touched her," he yelled, his voice raw with anguish, but his words were swallowed by the uproar. Vanessa, now fully immersed in her performance of a victim, doubled over and coughed violently, her act so convincing that even those who had once doubted her now seemed to waver. In that tumultuous moment, the respectful silence that had once defined the cabin was utterly shattered, replaced by a maelstrom of shouts, accusations, and racial invectives. As Horizon Airways Flight 119 continued its turbulent journey from Los Angeles to New York, Jerome King was left to endure the full weight of injustice and cruelty. His dignity lay in tatters, his suit was ruined, and his chance at closing the life-changing merger slipped further away with every passing minute. And yet, even as he was hauled away by security, his eyes burned with a fierce determination. Deep within his wounded soul, Jerome vowed that this injustice would not be his final chapter. One day, he promised himself, he would reclaim his honor in a way so grand and resounding that even those who had jeered at him would be forced to stand in awe. His eventual comeback would be a triumph of resilience, a spectacular act of revenge that would leave the world exclaiming, "Now that is what I call justice." Now, dear listener, as you reflect on this harrowing tale of sabotage, racial prejudice, and overwhelming cruelty, ask yourself, can you imagine a greater triumph than the one that awaits Jerome King? Will he rise like a phoenix from the ashes of this disgrace, turning every act of malice into a resounding victory that restores his dignity and transforms his pain into power? As the plane soars over the Rockies and the neon lights of New York draw near, know that even in the darkest moments, the human spirit can forge a path to redemption. This is not merely a story of one man's suffering, but a testament to the enduring power of resilience and the promise of a magnificent, long overdue retribution that will leave even the most hardened heart saying, "Now, that is what I call justice." Jerome King booked the next flight, a 10 a.m. red-eye to JFK, thinking that after all he had been through, he was finally free. No cuffs, no mob shouting his name, just a quiet seat in coach and the hope that the merger was still within reach. Vanessa Creed's HR trap had crumbled, her no-fly ban lifted, and for a moment, it looked like he had outsmarted her vicious system play. But as soon as the plane climbed and the cabin lights dimmed to a soft glow, his phone began to flood with notifications. One alert led to another until a tabloid headline screamed in bold across his screen, "Violent fraud disrupts Horizon flight, faces banned." Jerome's heart sank as he read the words that transformed his nightmare into a public spectacle. The article painted him as a raging conman who had attacked the crew and endangered passengers. Grainy photos showed his torn suit and cuffed wrists, and the narrative was twisted by an insider named Vanessa Creed. The headline declared, "Sources say he's a fake exec with a rap sheet," and lie after lie piled on top of one another. Before he could process the shock, his inbox overflowed with hate mail. Emails and text messages spat venomous comments like "Go back to the gutter, fraud," and "Horizon's better without you." Every hateful message felt like a dagger carved into his already wounded pride. His hands trembled as he scrolled through the barrage of insults while his assistant's frantic call came through, asking, "Boss, is this true?" Jerome's voice cracked as he replied, "I never did any of that." But the damage had been done. Social media exploded with posts, photoshopped images of his face behind jail bars, memes mocking his every misfortune, and accusations that stung like icy needles. Vanessa had not only turned the Denver arrest into a media frenzy, but had also smeared his reputation far beyond what any of the passengers on Horizon Flight 1019 could imagine. By the time he landed at JFK, the New York skyline loomed gray and unforgiving, and his phone buzzed non-stop with messages from clients and merger partners. A leaked email from Vanessa to a crew member flashed on his screen. "Should have stayed in coach. He's done now." The cab ride to his hotel was a blur of angry phone calls, hate mail piling up, and a desperate realization that his entire empire was now teetering on the edge. Clients began bailing on the $500 million merger, and his once sterling reputation lay in tatters. Jerome felt as if every part of him had been exposed and used against him, each betrayal more painful than the last. Vanessa, that venomous flight attendant with a grudge, had not only broken him physically on that flight, but had now weaponized his name to strike at the very heart of his career. Sitting in the back of a New York cab with the city's gray skyline blurring past his window, Jerome's torn suit reeked of coffee and soda, and the bruise on his jaw pulsed with every heartbeat. His phone would not stop buzzing, hate mail, angry posts, and calls from clients demanding explanations. The Denver arrest, which he had managed to clear with hard evidence and a heroic witness, was now being twisted by Vanessa into a story of violent fraud. Her smear campaign had grown into a national scandal, with headlines and social media posts branding him as the Horizon thug. Every time he thought he might salvage a little dignity, another cruel twist of fate hit him. Clients began to withdraw their investments, and his once solid merger teetered on the brink of collapse. Vanessa had not only undone his personal freedom with her lies, but had now infiltrated the boardroom. At the Horizon Airways Manhattan office, located in a gleaming tower on Fifth Avenue, the atmosphere was anything but celebratory. Jerome strode through the lobby, his head held high despite the weight of betrayal, only to be met with murmurs from suited executives and anxious glances from staff. On the 40th floor, in a corner office with a panoramic view of the city, he met with Ethan Carver, Horizon's CEO and an old college buddy. Ethan's face was etched with concern as Jerome recounted the events of the flight. The seat swap, the coffee spill, the mob, the false arrest, and, most damning of all, Vanessa's systematic smear that had led to a viral tabloid headline. Ethan's heavy sigh said it all when he replied, "I saw the news. It's total garbage. What the hell happened up there?" Jerome explained every detail, his voice low and steady despite the storm raging inside him. "She's a flight attendant with a grudge," he said, "and she's tanking me, my reputation, everything I've worked for." Ethan's tone shifted as he promised, "I'll dig into it and get HR on it. You're a shareholder, Jerome. We'll fix this." For a brief moment, relief washed over him like a ray of hope piercing through the darkest clouds. But that hope was short-lived. Later that afternoon, Jerome's phone pinged with a secure email from Horizon's executive team. The subject line sent a chill down his spine. Emergency vote. Shareholder conduct. As he opened the email, his stomach dropped. It read that due to recent events compromising company integrity, the board had voted to freeze his shares. His 51% stake worth millions, effective immediately, citing conduct unbecoming a majority stakeholder and pending review. Jerome called Ethan immediately, his voice tight with anger and disbelief. "What's this freeze crap? You said I was clear." Ethan's hesitant reply came, "Jerome, I tried. Someone on the board spun that tabloid mess as a liability. I couldn't stop it." The betrayal hit like a freight train. It wasn't enough that Vanessa had trashed his reputation in the media. Now she had infiltrated his own company, turning his allies against him. The CEO explained that Vanessa was close with Gerald Klein, the board treasurer, who had been fed a story about Jerome's supposed behavior on that flight, and Klein had pushed the vote through with his considerable clout. Jerome's jaw clenched in pain and fury, the bruise on his face throbbing as if in protest. His phone buzzed again. A leaked email from Vanessa to Gerald had been forwarded to him. The message read, "Langston's a liability, should have stayed in coach. Cut him loose, and I'll handle the fallout." Those words seared into him, the betrayal too raw to ignore. Jerome stormed to Ethan's desk, slamming his phone down. "Call Klein now," he demanded, his voice steely with resolve. Ethan picked up the line, and soon Gerald's gravelly tone filled the room. "Ethan, this about Langston?" Gerald sneered. Jerome interjected, his voice firm. "You froze my shares over a tabloid smear. I'm the reason Horizon's still flying." Gerald chuckled dryly and replied, "You're a PR disaster, son. Vanessa showed us the article, the ban, the arrest. We can't have that tied to us." Jerome's fists balled at his sides as he fought back the rising tide of emotion. "It's already done damage," he growled, "and now my shares are locked until you sort this out." The line went dead, leaving Jerome standing in silence, the full weight of Vanessa's treachery pressing down on him. The fallout was immediate. Merger partners began pulling out, clients dropped like flies, and what had been a multi-million-dollar deal was evaporating before his eyes. In the cold, cavernous holding area of Horizon's corporate headquarters, Jerome slumped into a chair, his spirit nearly crushed. His phone buzzed relentlessly with hate mail and angry messages, each one a bitter reminder of Vanessa's campaign against him. Every time he looked at his inbox, he saw the cruel words Vanessa had engineered to paint him as a monster, a fraud, a thug, a PR disaster. Yet even in that bleak moment, a spark of defiance still burned within him. He dialed Ethan again, his voice raw but determined. "Ethan, this isn't over. We have to fight back. Vanessa has taken everything from me. My reputation, my merger, my stake in Horizon. I'm not going to let her win." Ethan's response came with a note of steely resolve. "We'll get through this, Jerome. You built this company from the ground up. You're not just some guy in a suit. We'll expose her lies and reclaim your legacy." Those words were a lifeline, a promise that the battle was not yet lost. By early morning, Ethan delivered good news. Jerome woke in his midtown hotel to a text message. HR had reopened the case, the bogus complaints were trashed, and he was officially reinstated. For a fleeting moment, Jerome exhaled relief as he checked his email and saw that the merger team was back on board, albeit still shaken by the recent chaos. He quickly showered, swapped the borrowed shirt for a crisp white one from his suitcase, and headed to Horizon's Manhattan office on Fifth Avenue. The lobby buzzed with energy, and as he strode in, he felt a renewed determination to reclaim his ground. On the 40th floor, in a corner office with panoramic views of the city, Ethan met him with a firm handshake and a reassuring, "You're good, man. We've got your back." Jerome nodded, a heavy mix of relief and simmering rage coursing through him. Vanessa's media hit had stung deeply, but he had managed to turn the tables in the short term. Yet as he settled into the office, his phone pinged with yet another alert, a secure email from the board with the subject line, "Emergency Vote, Shareholder Conduct." His heart pounded as he read the new directive. His shares were frozen, his conduct deemed unacceptable. In that instant, Jerome felt as if every betrayal, every calculated lie by Vanessa had been amplified 100-fold. His empire, built over decades, now hung by a thread, and the smirking specter of Vanessa Creed loomed larger than ever. And so, as the Manhattan skyline flickered outside his window and the hum of the city mingled with his racing thoughts, Jerome King, once a dignified, successful executive, stood at a crossroads. His reputation had been shredded, his merger threatened, and his financial future locked in stasis. But one thing remained certain. He would not go down without a fight. The injustice he had suffered at the hands of a vindictive flight attendant who had weaponized every tool at her disposal would be repaid in kind. In his mind, a plan was forming. A grand retribution that would not only restore his honor but also leave the world gasping in astonishment. As he stared at the damning leaked emails and the board's decision, Jerome vowed to reclaim everything Vanessa had taken from him. The war was far from over, and the next move would be the most spectacular yet. Now, dear listener, as you absorb this tale of ruthless betrayal, corporate sabotage, and a reputation turned to ash, ask yourself, how far would you go to reclaim your honor? Stay tuned as Jerome King's epic comeback unfolds, a triumph of resilience that promises to shake the very foundations of injustice. Charles Monroe's world had been shattered. The merger was dead, clients had bolted, and his 51% stake in Horizon, once his crowning achievement, was locked away like a fortune he couldn't touch. It all began when Vanessa Creed's insidious campaign of lies took a dark turn. Ethan's betrayal, however unwilling, had stung deep, and Vanessa's leaked email, supposedly meant to stay hidden, reverberated in his mind like a relentless taunt. He had rallied his CO ally, convinced that he could stem the bleeding, but Vanessa had gutted him at the top. Now, as he sat with his hands clenched and stared out at the Manhattan skyline, Charles was plotting a counterstrike that would be as audacious as it was vindictive. He didn't waste a minute. Pulling a spare laptop from his suitcase, one he'd snatched from the hotel and already synced to his cloud, Charles began assembling his war chest. Ticket stubs, boarding passes, witness names from Denver, all meticulously cataloged like ammunition for the battle ahead. He called his trusted lawyer, Carla Reyes, his voice low and urgent as he declared, "Carla, I've got proof. Flight cams, passenger videos, everything." Without hesitation, Carla replied, "I'm on it. I'll hit CNN and get the truth out by morning." Charles sent the files, watching the upload bar crawl along as the hotel Wi-Fi stuttered under the strain. By dawn, the story broke with a headline blazing across every screen. Horizon passenger framed by attendant, evidence clears name. Grainy footage of Vanessa's clumsy coffee spill, her phony poisoning stunt, and multiple passenger testimonies corroborated his account. The narrative had been flipped. Suddenly, the hashtag Justice for Charles was trending, and Vanessa's credibility was in freefall. Relief hit him like a shot of whiskey, warm, sharp, and promising redemption. Standing by the window as the sunrise painted the city in gold, Charles watched his phone shift from a torrent of hate mail to messages of support. Clients texted apologies and assurances. The merger, once teetering on the brink, began to flicker back to life. Ethan's call came through, his voice tentative at first, but soon filled with resolve. "Charles, you're not alone. We're going to crush this smear. Vanessa is toast." Charles could almost believe it, until his phone lit up with a fresh barrage of alerts. A tabloid headline now screamed, "Violent fraud disrupts Horizon flight, faces banned," painting him as a raging con man. His inbox overflowed with hate mail, each message like a dagger. "Go back to the gutter, fraud," and "Horizon is better without you." Even his social media was awash with doctored photos, his face photoshopped onto mugshots and scandalous confession posts. It was as if Vanessa had hacked his very identity, turning his public image into a digital execution. Desperation set in as his followers, once supportive, now raged. Memes of his mugshot spread like wildfire across X, and even his assistant's panicked calls confirmed the worst. Clients were bailing, and the merger was crumbling. In a frenzy, Charles dialed Carla again. "She's in my account posting lies, killing me again," he managed to say, his voice shaking with raw anger. Carla's response was immediate and fierce. "We'll trace it, lock it down, and sue her to hell." Meanwhile, threats began pouring in. vicious messages telling him to die, even doxing his sister in Atlanta. His phone buzzed non-stop with a venomous swarm of hatred. Vanessa had not only destroyed his reputation in the press, but had weaponized his very identity online, turning his win into a public execution. Unable to stand idly by, Charles reached out to his tech guy Jamal, a wizard from his startup days. "Jamal, she hacked me. Can you stop it?" Jamal's tense voice promised, "She's good, man, but I'll kill the posts and reset your account. Just give me an hour." As the minutes ticked by, Charles's heart pounded with both hope and dread. Finally, Jamal called back triumphantly. "The posts are down, and we traced her to a Denver." For a brief moment, Charles felt the flood of digital threats slow, yet then, his phone rang from a blocked number. Vanessa's low, venomous voice slithered through. "You'll never fly again, Monroe. I've got more where that came from." The line clicked dead, leaving him with a chilling reminder that his triumph was fragile and temporary. His blood still pulsed with the pain of betrayal, the bruise on his jaw a constant throbbing reminder of the chaos on that doomed flight, and the hotel room began to feel like a cage. His sister's safety was at risk, his murderer was dead, and his name was being relentlessly shredded online. In that moment, Charles knew he had to fight back harder than ever. He called Carla once more, his voice tight with determination. "Sue Horizon. Breach of trust, defamation, all of it. End this now." Carla's crisp response was immediate. "Filing tomorrow. We have all the footage, leaks, and her IP trace. They'll settle or bleed." By noon the next day, the lawsuit hit the headlines. A $50 million claim that slammed Horizon's board, with Vanessa named as a co-defendant. The press erupted, and soon the hashtag Langston Strikes Back was trending. Horizon caved fast, offering a settlement of $10 million, along with Vanessa's immediate termination. The wire hit Charles's account by dusk, and he stood at the window as the setting sun lifted the weight from his shoulders, if only slightly. He had won, buried her career in the rubble of her lies. But even as he stepped out of his midtown hotel in a crisp navy suit, ready to seal his redemption with a CNN interview, a new twist awaited him. A squad car screeched up behind his rental, lights blazing and sirens wailing, heralding yet another shock that threatened to shatter everything he had fought so hard to reclaim. After Vanessa Creed's final act of sabotage was caught on a security tablet, Dexter Langley's world shattered. The valet's confession confirmed it. Vanessa, wearing a blonde cap, had swapped keys and planted evidence. "She's fired," Dexter whispered, his voice hollow, as Carla vowed, "I'll get the charges dropped and nail her for tampering." By nightfall, the DA had the proof, and Vanessa's case collapsed, freeing Dexter. But at dawn, CNN blared a headline, "Langley caught in drug bust. Hero to thug overnight." His arrest video looped, his name smeared with lies, and threats poured in. His sister's safety was at risk when a black SUV rammed his rental off the curb into a 50-foot ditch. Dexter dove behind shattered glass as a red-branded brick taunted him, "Next time you're in it." Carla's urgent rescue and the crash left him reeling, yet anger burned hotter than his bruised jaw. Determined, Dexter hacked Horizon's HR files and uncovered Vanessa's pattern of racist abuses and collusion with board treasurer Gerald Klein. The evidence exploded online, and within hours, Vanessa was arrested for attempted murder. As Dexter watched her ruin on news, he vowed, "I'll build my own sky," turning her betrayal into his triumph. Reginald James's journey through systemic injustice and calculated malice reminds us that racial bias is not a fleeting hurt. It is a carefully orchestrated assault on dignity. Vanessa Creed, exploiting her position and privilege, shattered Reginald's career and nearly his life with every petty act. A spilled cup of coffee, a false arrest, and a media smear that turned a respected executive into a villain overnight. Yet, Reginald's story is one of resilience. He refused to be silenced. Instead of bowing down, he gathered undeniable evidence, from security footage to witness testimonies, and fought back with relentless determination. His silence transformed into a weapon, turning each attack into a stepping stone toward reclaiming his honor. In the end, Reginald not only exposed Vanessa's web of lies, but also dismantled the corrupt system that had once protected her. By selling his shares for billions and leaving Horizon to crumble, he proved that true power lies in creating your own destiny. His triumphant comeback is a lesson. Fight smart, stand firm, and never allow hate to define your worth. Now, dear listener, share your thoughts. Have you ever turned someone's attack into your win? Hit like if Reginald's comeback inspires you, and subscribe for more stories of grit and resilience.